disappearances and mysterious returns. The fire was a dying sun, its embers casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to mock the 5 figures huddled around it. The air in the clearing was cold and still, smelling of pine and damp earth, and the only sounds were the crackle of the fire and the distant, lonely call of a night bird. A girl named Iris pulled a worn, gray wool blanket tighter around her shoulders, her eyes reflecting the orange glow. She reached into the pocket of her jacket and pulled out a small object, holding it up for the others to see. It was a pair of vintage binoculars, made of brass and leather, surprisingly heavy for their size. The lenses were dark and scratched. "This story," Iris began, her voice a low murmur that was swallowed by the surrounding silence, "is called The Tale of the Watcher in the Woods. It's about a boy who didn't believe in ghosts, but learned to fear something far older. This story is about Leo." Leo was the pragmatic one in his group of friends. Where they saw haunted houses, he saw poor construction and rattling pipes. Where they heard ghosts, he heard the wind. So when his friends dared him to spend the night in the old Oberon observatory, he'd agreed without a second thought. The observatory had been abandoned for 40 years, since the night its renowned astronomer, Dr. Alistair Oberon, simply vanished, leaving behind his life's work and a half-eaten meal. The official story was that he'd suffered a breakdown and wandered into the woods. The town's story was different. Leo's best friend, Mia, drove him to the edge of the property that Saturday evening. The observatory was a stark, domed silhouette against a twilight sky, perched on a hill and surrounded by a dense, encroaching forest. "You sure about this, Leo?" Mia asked, her hands tight on the steering wheel. "People say weird things happen up here. They say you can sometimes see a light in the dome, even though the power's been cut for decades." "It's probably just kids," Leo said, slinging his backpack over his shoulder. Inside was a sleeping bag, a flashlight, some snacks, and a camera to document his victory. "Or atmospheric refraction. I'll be fine. See you at sunrise." He gave her a confident grin and watched her taillights disappear down the winding road, leaving him in utter silence. The inside of the observatory was a time capsule of dust and decay. The main room was dominated by the giant, silent telescope, a cold metal leviathan pointing through the open slit in the dome at the emerging stars. Leo set up his sleeping bag in a corner and decided to explore. In a small study off the main room, its walls lined with books on celestial mechanics and cosmic phenomena, he found a large, locked trunk. Picking the old, simple lock was easy. Inside, nestled among star charts and personal journals, were the binoculars. They were beautiful, meticulously crafted. On the brass housing, an inscription was etched in elegant script, Ad Astra per Aspera. Through hardships to the stars. He lifted them to his eyes. The world through the lenses was dark, tinged with a sepia tone, and the scratches on the glass created web-like distortions. He scanned the room, the bookshelves, the desk. Nothing. He pointed them up through the open dome at the night sky. He focused on a bright star, and for a split second, the image sharpened with impossible clarity, as if he were in orbit around it, before fading back to a blur. He lowered them, his heart beating a little faster. A trick of the mind, he told himself. A cool artifact. As full darkness fell, the first strange thing happened. Leo was eating a candy bar when he heard a faint, rhythmic click, click, click coming from the main room. It sounded like the telescope's guidance system engaging. He rushed in, flashlight beam cutting through the blackness. The great machine was still and silent. But as he stood there, he heard another sound. A soft, shuffling footstep on the metal grating of the observation walkway above him. He swung his light upward. Nothing. "Hello?" he called out. His voice echoed through the vast space and was met with silence. This was the first scary scene, the absolute isolation, the sounds that defied logic, the feeling of being a tiny, insignificant organism in a giant, dark shell. Shaken, he retreated to the study and decided to test the binoculars again, a nervous habit. He pointed them out the grimy window, into the deep blackness of the woods. He adjusted the focus, the lenses grinding stiffly. The dark trees swam in and out of view. And then he saw it. Something pale and unmoving, standing between two thick pines. It was a figure, tall and impossibly thin, its face a featureless white oval. It was just standing there, watching the observatory. Leo jerked the binoculars away from his eyes, his breath catching in his throat. He stared out the naked window. Nothing but darkness. He slowly raised the binoculars again, his hands trembling. He focused on the same spot. The figure was gone. He told himself it was a trick of the light, a dead tree stump his mind had misinterpreted. But a cold knot of dread had formed in his stomach. An hour later, he heard the footsteps again, this time on the stairs leading up to the dome. Creak, creak, creak. Slow, deliberate. He grabbed a heavy wrench from a tool bench and climbed the stairs, his flashlight beam shaking. "I know you're there," he yelled, his voice lacking its earlier confidence. The footsteps stopped. He reached the top. The platform was empty. The telescope loomed, silent and accusing. But the air was frigidly cold, and it smelled of ozone, like after a lightning strike. He was alone. The second terrifying scene happened around 2 a.m. Leo, unable to sleep, was sitting with his back against the study wall, the binoculars on his lap like a dangerous pet. The wind had picked up outside, moaning softly around the dome. He heard a new sound. A whisper. It wasn't coming from one direction, it seemed to emanate from the very walls themselves, a dry, papery rustle of words he couldn't quite make out. It sounded like numbers, coordinates. He put the binoculars to his eyes again, a morbid compulsion he could no longer fight. He scanned the dark woods. Nothing. He panned down, and the lenses focused on the observatory's main door, 20 feet away. Standing right outside the door, its back to him, was the tall, thin figure. It was wearing a tattered, dark coat, and its head was cocked at an unnatural angle, as if listening. Leo froze, unable to look away. As he watched, the figure slowly began to turn its head over its shoulder, to look back through the door, through the binoculars, directly at him. Leo dropped the binoculars as if they'd burned him. He scrambled to the door and slammed the heavy bolt shut, his heart hammering against his ribs. The rest of the night was a blur of terror. Every sound was magnified. The whispers grew slightly louder, now accompanied by the faint smell of something chemical, like developing fluid. He clutched the wrench until his knuckles were white, too afraid to even look out a window. He just had to make it to dawn. The climax came just as the first gray light of false dawn began to tinge the sky. The whispers had stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse, a held breath. Leo, exhausted and frayed, dared to hope it was over. He needed to see the sun. He needed proof that the night was ending. He unbolted the main door and pulled it open, stepping out onto the gravel pathway, the cold air biting his face. He took a deep, shuddering breath. He'd made it. And then he heard it. Behind him, from inside the observatory, a sound he hadn't heard all night. The deep, resonant hum of the giant telescope's motor powering up. It was impossible. The power was dead. He turned around, his blood turning to ice. The great dome was rotating, the slit aligning with a point in the fading night sky. The telescope itself was moving, tilting, aiming not at the stars, but down. Towards him. Standing at the controls in the shadows of the main room was the figure. It was taller than a man, its limbs too long, its face still that smooth, blank oval. But now, in the dim light, Leo could see it was wearing the tattered remnants of a lab coat. It moved with a jerky, unnatural precision, its hands, long, thin, and almost skeletal, flipping switches that hadn't worked in 40 years. It was Dr. Oberon. Or what was left of him. Their eyes met. The thing that was once Dr. Oberon stopped its work. It tilted its head. And then it started to walk towards the door, towards Leo. It didn't run. It moved with a terrible, inevitable slowness, its footsteps making no sound on the gravel. Leo was paralyzed, a rabbit in the gaze of a predator. This was the full, horrifying appearance of the entity, the revelation of the curse. Oberon hadn't vanished. He'd seen something through his lens, something that had seen him back, something that had reached out and claimed him, hollowing him out and turning him into this watcher. And the binoculars weren't just a pair of binoculars, they were a smaller, portable version of his telescope. A receiver. A thing that invited the gaze of whatever was out there. Leo finally broke free of his paralysis. He turned and ran, crashing through the undergrowth, not caring about the branches that whipped at his face and tore his clothes. He didn't look back. He ran until he reached the main road, collapsing on the asphalt just as the sun truly began to rise. Mia found him there an hour later, shivering, muddy, and babbling about the Watcher. Iris lowered the binoculars, the fire now just embers. Leo never went back into the woods. He moved away to a big, bright city a year later. He threw the binoculars into the deepest lake he could find, hoping to bury that night forever. For a while, he thought he was safe. She leaned forward, her face grim. But last week, he got a package in the mail. No return address. Inside, wrapped in old star charts, was a pair of binoculars. Brass and leather. He knew it was impossible. It was the same pair. And when he looked through them, just to prove to himself it was a copy, a fake, the image was clear. Perfect. He was looking into his own dark apartment hallway. And standing there, right outside his door, was a tall, thin figure with a pale, featureless face. It was just standing there. Waiting. It had followed him home. Iris held up the binoculars one last time. He mailed them to me for safekeeping. He said I'd know what to do. The members of the storytelling circle sat in stunned silence, the weight of the story pressing down on them. The woods around them felt suddenly vast and full of unseen eyes. So, what did you do? One of them finally whispered. Iris offered a thin, haunted smile. I keep them close. I figure it's better if I'm the one watching. She slowly raised the binoculars to her eyes and pointed them out into the deep, black woods beyond their dying fire. She focused the stiff, grinding lenses. And she gasped. The shadows are deep, and they hold more stories. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss the next telling. Your subscription is like a light in the darkness, it helps others find their way here, to our fire. Did you see something moving in the corner of your mind while you listened? Let us know in the comments, what did you think stood outside Leo's door at the end? Your theories might just keep the Watcher at bay, or invite something else. If this story held you in its grip, leave a like. It tells the algorithm there are more brave listeners like you, unafraid of what lurks in the quiet places. But be careful what you look for. Sometimes, things look back. Until next time.